The Russian aggression against Ukraine marks for many a turning point in Europe. Suddenly, Europeans see a full-fledged war in their vicinity, and many ask, can Europe defend itself? A question that hasn't been asked for a long time. Although in hindsight, that question should have been maybe asked earlier. As defense is back on Europe's agenda, it's time for EU Untangled to unscrew some tanks, unpack some policies to understand a bit better where the EU is standing when it comes to defense. Welcome to EU Untangled. My name is Alex Roth, and together with my co-host Victor Aguilar, who will join our conversation in a moment, we try to explain the complexities of the EU, topic by topic. For many years, defense has not been a very hot topic in Brussels. Many did not believe in the possibility of a large war on the European continent and therefore the need to invest in the military. Moreover, defense and security policies lie predominantly with the member states and not with the European Union. After all, being able to defend its own border appears to be the ultimate reason of existence for any sovereign nation state. However, things are more complicated, as always. Because if you think about it, defense would be the most plausible thing to organize on the EU level. When it comes to defending the EU, why would 27 individual armies with its separate command structures and equipment be better than one European army? Obviously, others have thought so as well, and there exist already numerous defense structures within and next to the EU, overlapping and conflicting. For instance, many EU member states are also part of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is an intergovernmental military alliance in which its member states agree to defend each other against attacks. In addition, the EU itself has its own diplomatic service, the European External Action Service. The EEAS oversees all international relations of the European Union and carries out the EU's common foreign and security policy, including the common security and defense policy. On top, the EU has set up the European Peace Facility, a common European fund that can be used to finance military and defense-related equipment, infrastructure, and technical support. And finally, the new and old Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, decided to give more importance to the topic of defense by creating the role of European Commissioner for Defense and Space. Let's see what Andrius Kubilius, a former Lithuanian Prime Minister, will make out of this role. As always, when discussing EU matters, things are complicated. Despite these complex matters, a few core questions remain. Can the EU have a common defense policy? Is it prepared for self-defense? Could it even form its own army? As neither Victor nor I are experts on that matter, we went to the Wilfried Martens Centre for European Studies, a Brussels-based think tank associated with the European People's Party, the EPP, which is the largest party in the European Parliament. At the Wilfried Martens Centre, we met with Ionela Ciolan, who works there as a research officer and focuses on European foreign policy, security and defense. She has ample experience in the field of defense, and before her current position, she was with the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, the European Policy Centre, and the Centre for European Policy Analysis, just to name a few. She holds a PhD from the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration in Romania. As you know, EU Untangled is an independent, Brussels-based podcast, so all the opinions Victor and I express in this episode are of our own and cannot be attributed to anyone else. We do not speak on behalf of any organization or third party. But now enough of the pre-talk. Let's dive into the conversation. Victor started it with a Latin proverb.
You mentioned in an article that Europeans need to apply the Latin proverb, si vis pacem, para bellum, which roughly translates as, if you want peace, prepare for war. Can you explain a little bit why you like that proverb?
I like this proverb because it's very simple and everyone can understand it. In order to make sure that an aggressor will think twice before attacking, you have to have all the capabilities to fight against that aggressor. And currently, we are still lacking a lot of capabilities in Europe in making the Russians and the Kremlin, President Putin, thinking twice before a further attack on our European continent.
Can you go a bit more into detail? What would that mean concretely for Europe?
Well, for almost 3 years, we have a Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, which changed the European security architecture. Europe is not anymore an island of peace as we believe it for the past 3 decades, and the Russian attack on the European territory is no longer inconceivable. Russia is building this imperialist agenda, and it has a transition to a war economy, which means that Kremlin will remain the main threat to the European security for the foreseeable future. And in this very complicated geopolitical context, there are scenarios that in the future there might be a possible Russian attack on the EU NATO territory in the next 5 to 8 years. So in this case, of course, the European states have to strengthen their security and deterrence. Moreover, we have to keep in mind the fact that the traditional European mindset that the US is providing the security umbrella for the continent, it's no longer a guarantee. Even in the most optimistic scenario that will have a pro-transatlantic US administration, US cannot be the protector of the whole world given the existing global geopolitical context. War in the Middle East, rising tensions between United States and China, also rising tensions between United States and Iran, and also the increasing pressure from China on Taiwan. And now we have a new president in the White House, which Donald Trump, which will start his mandate in January 2025, and there are clear signs and signals from various discussions that people in Brussels are having with their counterparts in Washington that the United States is no longer interested in providing the same level of security for Europe, and they're expecting Europeans to take more on the responsibility for defending and securing the European continent, because this will allow the US to focus on Asia-Pacific region. For example, there is a lot of dissatisfaction among some of American political groups about the perceived imbalance in the transatlantic relations. These groups see America as playing the role of the security umbrella for NATO, while the Europeans are the free riders, enjoying an advanced security environment without having to invest much in it. And this imbalance is no longer acceptable to most Americans, and this adds another pressure for the Europeans to start investing more on their own security and defense, both at NATO level, but also the European Union level.
So that begs obviously the question, what are then the principal threats for Europe, and can it defend itself against them?
Well, this is a very complicated question, and what we are seeing for the moment is that the security threats that have emerged in the recent year fall into the hybrid area. And here we have NATO that covers the conventional security of the European continent, but also these hybrid elements are out of NATO's scope and out of the Washington Treaty scope. So we have this hybridity of security threats, which basically means that in the future, in order to protect the European continent holistically, to have this 360 degrees security of the European continent, will need both NATO and the European Union working together, because there are elements where the European Union can complement the work of NATO.
You talk about the hybrid elements that are outside of the NATO scope. Just for our listeners to understand what that is, could you briefly explain what you mean by hybrid threats?
So yes, in the past couple of years, we are seeing a lot of Russian interference in disinformation and foreign interference in manipulation campaigns, also in electoral processes. We had recently the elections in the Republic of Moldova for presidential elections, but also an election to include the European path, European Union membership path in their constitution. And we saw that there were a lot of, these are called FIMI, the foreign information manipulation interferences from the Russian side. We also have a lot of cyber attacks, and also Chatham House has a very interesting report published a couple of months ago, which analyzes the Russian hybrid attacks in Europe. And they realize that we, apart from these hybrid cyber attacks, we have espionage cases, we have sabotages of our critical infrastructure. There were pipelines that they were damaged, or there were undersea cables that they were cut. So there are a lot of this hybrid element, and wars in the future will have this very gray attitude in trying to because Russia doesn't want to start a conventional war with NATO. So, of course, they will try to make sure that they have this atmosphere of doubt that they are the perpetrators.
Yeah.
And in order to, everything will be done under this fog of confusion. And in order to do that, of course, they will try to push forward with weakening our societies. Also, one of the ideas, and recently we have this publication by former President, Finnish President Niinisto, in strengthening the security and resilience of our continent. The fact that we need to work more on civil preparedness and civil defense in raising the resilience and the social community in our countries, because fake news, disinformation, all these campaigns that are seeing online are threatening our democratic electoral processes.
On a certain level, the EU seems to be rather prepared compared to, let's say, a potential attacker like Russia. And here I'm just looking at some figures. So the EU has almost 3 times more inhabitants than the Russian Federation. It has a longer life expectancy, and it actually has a larger military budget if we count for all the 27 EU member states. However, if Russia were to attack an EU member state tomorrow, we could see how this would very quickly become a very complex situation for the European Union. So it's not just about how much you invest and how many military personnel you have, but it goes beyond that. And you speak about fragmentation, which we should try to reduce, and resilience, which we should try to increase.
Yes, actually, we have to work on everything. We have to work on armament capabilities. We have to work on resilience. We have to work on our unity and cohesion at the European level. Because in the end, what we are seeing, and we saw in Ukraine, and we are seeing also how Russia is acting in the eastern neighborhood, in the Republic of Moldova, in Georgia, but also other countries, European countries on the eastern flank. They are trying to exploit all the vulnerabilities and weaknesses in our societies. But I would like also to highlight the fact that we need also to work on the concrete, conventional defense capabilities, because Europe has to catch up the gap caused by 30 years of defense underfunding. In order to be better protected against the possible confrontation with Russia in the future, and to also balance the US military investment in NATO, the European Union will need to invest around 500 billions of euros over the next decade. The big question now in Brussels is, where will this money come from? And there are several solutions being discussed at the moment. This is one of the topics that it's currently the hottest topic in Brussels.
One could say it's literally the 500 billion euro question.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the discussion is that in order to reach this amount, and probably you also saw that today there was an article in Financial Times that mentioned that the European Commission would like to allocate all the money from the cohesion funds.
With cohesion funds, Ionela refers to several pots of money spent by the European Union in countries and regions. These funds have different aims, such as economic development, reducing disparities, or supporting regions most affected by the transition to climate neutrality. Almost a third of the entire EU budget is spent on cohesion policies,
which are not spent from the current budgetary framework to military mobility projects. So basically strengthening the dual-use infrastructure of our countries.
And by dual-use infrastructure?
Yes, so by dual-use infrastructure, I mean both civilian and military infrastructure, because we need to have bridges, roads, airfields, train gauges on the same standard. Because for the past 3 decades, the European countries only invested in their public infrastructure with a civilian purpose in mind, not military civilian in mind. And now with the war in Ukraine, we are seeing that this infrastructure, it's not developed enough to support the military use of it. So there are issues with the bridges where those bridges cannot stand, the weight of a tank. There is also a problem with our highways, all that cement and everything, the asphalt that it's used, it's not resilient enough for military convoys, and all these very specific technical elements need to be resolved. So that's why the European Union says that now we should use the cohesion funds, which weren't used in this multi-financial framework, for these European military mobility projects, with the idea to lower the time that a convoy spends crossing specific countries and making sure that we can move very fast weapons and armament from one place to another.
Yeah, I see both the opportunity and the challenge. Today, if you wanted, and here I'm just speaking hypothetically, but if you wanted to move, let's say, ammunition from Portugal to Poland, I can imagine you can run into literally a lot of roadblocks. So how are you going to get it from point A to point B fast enough so that it can be used and it can be deployed?
Yes, this is one of the questions that we have to ask and to resolve in the upcoming years. So it's not only about having the funds to revamp our critical transport infrastructure, it's also about creating common legislation, making sure that we don't have any bottlenecks in saying that a convoy that goes from Germany to Poland will not stay for 2 weeks at the border. In order to do that, we are proposing this European military Schengen, having the same rules, having the same regulations inside the European Union member states, and making sure that we can send armament and personnel very fast from one place to another. And these are very technical discussions for which we didn't prepare in the past 30 years because there wasn't a need to do that. And now, of course, we have to rush and do everything as fast as possible in order to increase the deterrence, to show to the Russians that if they are even thinking to attack the European continent, that will be very counterproductive and very destructive for them, because we are prepared and will react very fast.
Where do you see the most important role of the EU when it comes to defense in the next years? Where can the EU really make a difference, or should make a difference, in order to strengthen the capabilities? And maybe just a follow-up then on that, because the EU has already a lot of institutions. For instance, the European Defense Agency, there are upcoming defense commissioner, we have a common external action service, we have a so-called European Peace Facility. So there's already quite something. What is useful and what do we need more?
So what we have now, there are only segments of defense policy. And we are seeing that President von der Leyen wants to build a viable and credible European Defence Union. This is also the proposal of the Martens Centre, for which we worked in the past 1 year and a half. We have a very comprehensive publication on this. It's called 7 Ds for Sustainability Defence Extended, where we are proposing to have a European Defence Union built on 9 specific defense elements with 81 policy recommendations that the European member states and the European decision makers here in Brussels have to adopt in the next years in order to build up basically the defense pillar of the European Union, which also strengthens the European pillar of NATO. And in having this European Defence Union, basically we need to work on several steps to build that. First, the recently published European Defence Industrial Strategy and the European Defence Industry Programme should be adopted and fully implemented by the member states to create a coherent European defence industry. We have a lot of work on this, so this is one of those elements where we have to work a lot. Secondly, the EU should declare a decade for defense in order to harmonize all the defense plans and capability priorities at the European Union level.
And this is because you foresee that it would take the EU a decade to do this?
Because there is a lot of fragmentation and lack of interoperability between the member states, even at NATO level. Mm-hmm. So that's why we need to invest in this.
By interoperability, you mean that, for instance, soldiers cannot talk to each other because they have different communication systems, or they have different tanks that don't have the same ammunition, or is that what you refer to?
Yes, but by interoperability, I'm also thinking about the fact that we have the member states who are also defense industrial states, and they are producing various armament capabilities. Some of them on those products they are producing, they are not compatible among the other products produced among the other European member states, which makes the situation very complicated in case of a war, where we have 3 different systems that are not interoperable and will make very hard for, the soldiers to operate them. Then there is also the idea that we have to follow the NATO benchmarks and standards, and in making sure that doing that, there should be more cooperation and collaboration among the member states, and especially among the member states who are also defense industrial states, that they have solid defense industrial companies which are producing a lot of capabilities. Because at the current moment, we are also quite a lot dependent on products, defense products, armament capabilities that we are buying from outside of the European territory. 78% of our arm purchases are coming from non-EU countries, which obviously it's a problem because it also brings a lot of idea of the fragmentation.
That could help explain why in Europe we have 12 different types of battle tanks, whereas in the United States there is only one. So one can easily imagine how the United States can easily deploy their battle tanks, and they can be used by any of their soldiers. But here, if we wanted, let's say, German soldiers to operate, and here again I'm speaking hypothetically, a Latvian battle tank, maybe they would need some previous training in order to be able to do that. It's not like riding a bike where I can just borrow Alex's bike and say, oh, it's fairly similar to mine, maybe just 2 speeds more. Here, it's a bit more complicated.
Yes, you are right. So that's why when we talk about the development of a European armament market and also this European common market for defense, basically what we'll do will solve all the fragmentation and internal competition, because as mentioned, currently each state has clauses which prioritize and it protects its own armament companies. And the key advantage of United States that the states enjoy is the fact that they have a common market in arms production. And thanks to this common market, the US relies only over 30 systems, while in the European Union, the competition between the member states, there are more than 170 systems, which leads to small-scale production in the European Union, higher unit production costs, and a waste of financial resources available for research and development, in addition to what you mentioned, the fact that there will be the need for a lot of training for people to use those very different systems.
You said the EU has a lot of different armament systems, and still we are buying most of them from non-EU countries. Why is that the case?
As we saw in the context of the war in Ukraine, the European armament market is not producing enough in terms of quantity, and it's not producing fast enough to meet the demands. In this respect, of course, the European defense industry is still underdeveloped, and that's why a large number of the European countries are buying arms products from companies in non-EU countries like United States, from Israel, South Korea, or Japan. But all those products which are from non-NATO markets, they are also not according to the NATO standards, which also creates another level of challenges in terms of more training, more need to increase the interoperability, a lot of fragmentation among these products. So that's why one of the proposals, and which it's also now as one of the major priority for the first Commissioner for Defense and Space, is to work on building this European defense market. And in order to do that, basically he will have to focus on making sure that the countries are cooperating more together, that we are buying more together, we are spending that money in Europe, and for that also the European defense industrial strategy has some benchmarks that needs to be implemented. As such, by 2030, at least 50% of the member states' procurement budget and 60s by 2035 should be allocated to the EU arms suppliers or companies, and also at least 40% of the defense equipment should be procured in a collaborative manner. So what we are seeing is the fact that the Europeans will try to work more together in order to solve this fragmentation and underdevelopment of the European defense market. And by developing this, we are also bringing economic benefits for the European citizens, because when this common armament market develops, will lead also to various beneficial effects for the member states, because jobs are created across Europe. And this will also be one of those political messages that will be easy to sell to the citizens, which are more interested in having, a good quality of life and spend less on defense, for example.
Yeah, and I think the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, summed that up very well in her mission letter to the first ever European Commissioner for Defense and Space, Andrius Kubilius, who is a former Lithuanian Prime Minister. And she said to him that at the heart of the task of the EU, there must be one single principle. Europe must spend more, spend better, spend European.
Yes.
And that's the way to deliver a true European defense union.
Yes, I agree with that.
So it's a big task on the shoulders of the first holder of this position, but I suppose that's also something necessary, because if we ask the average Europeans in general, they want to feel safe. And I find very interesting that in the latest Eurobarometer, which was conducted in spring this year, 77% of Europeans say to be in favor of a common defense and security policy among EU countries. And 67% agree that the EU should be a place of stability in a troubled world. And almost the same percentage think that the EU has already sufficient power and tools to defend the economic interests of Europe in the global economy. So this is a very strong call for policymakers to deliver on these expectations. And it's no small task from what we've been hearing in this conversation.
Yes, and this was also one of that main elements throughout the European Parliament election campaigns. And von der Leyen, as Spitzencandidate, went across the European countries and she promoted the idea of strengthening the security and defense of the European Union. And she basically, it's adding a European defense together with competitiveness as her main flagship projects for this mandate. And this is important. And you were mentioning about the fact that we have for the first time a commissioner for defense, which is great. According to the treaties, there are some ways for the European Union to work on defense. We see that not only the citizens are asking the European Union to step in and do more to support the member states to increase their defense capabilities, but we are also seeing that this political signal that the European Union should take seriously the numerous security threats that basically are encroaching our union. And this new position for Commissioner for Defense will have to build this European defense technological industrial base. So basically all the capabilities that we need to support our defense against a future security threat coming from outside of the continent. And Commissioner Kubilius, basically, he will oversee critical areas such as defense investment, building the defense industry, more work on joint procurement. This is an important element. Also, research and innovation, which will further consolidate the Europe's defense framework, plus military mobility and space. So he has a lot of elements to work on. And you mentioned the European Defence Union. This will be realized in a coordinated manner between Commissioner Kubilius, so the Commissioner for Defence, but also High Representative Kaja Kallas. Because, as you mentioned in the mission letters, we have a very specific split of tasks between both of them.
Ionela mentions Kaja Kallas. The former Prime Minister of Estonia is the so-called High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and also Vice President of the European Commission. In her role as High Representative, she leads the European External Action Service, the EEAS, which is something like the Foreign Ministry of the European Union, although it is not called like that. Ionela also mentions the mission letters. A mission letter is a kind of homework which is given to each commissioner by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. These letters contain tasks and responsibilities the President expects the Commissioner to work on and therefore give an indication on which projects the new European Commission will focus on in the next time.
And both of them have been tasked with drafting a white paper for the future of European defense within the first days of the mandate. And this will basically be that document which will create more clarity in between what the High Representative will focus on and what will be the mandate of the Commissioner for Defense. According to the treaties and according to the mission letters, we know at the moment that the High Representative will continue dealing with everything that comes to crisis management, missions and operations of the European Union, and everything else when it comes to working on building the defense capabilities, building the defense market will be the task of Kubilius. I would also add to the fact that this is an idea that we have here at the Martens Centre. It's an idea shared by the European People's Party that the European Defence Agency will make more sense to be moved under the Commissioner for Defence.
Because right now the European Defence Agency is administered by the Council.
Yes, it's administered by the council, and it's under the leadership of the High Representative, and will make more sense to have ADA under the Commissioner for Defense, because those very specific coordination tasks among the member states on procurement, investment, innovation should be led by the Commissioner for Defense. Nevertheless, as mentioned, we have a very complicated institutional division of responsibilities between the Council, which are the member states, the High Representative, the Commission, and now with the addition of a new Commissioner for Defense, basically what we'll need from our European decision makers in the upcoming years, a lot of creative thinking and strong political bargaining in order to make sure that we'll have a unified and coherent European defense policy.
It sounds to me like we have a lot of the ingredients in place. Maybe what we're lacking is the recipe.
We have elements of the recipe, but we need more political will, which is the cook, as mentioned, in order to basically prepare that recipe.
There you go. We wanted to call this episode, Can the EU Have an Army? And I know you've said before in one of your opinion pieces that when we talk about the European Defence Union, we're not thinking about a European army. There are no plans for that. Can you explain that a little bit?
So we'll not have an European army, as NATO doesn't have an European army, or NATO army in NATO's case, because everything that deals with armed forces, from recruitment to deployment, it's a member states' competence and will remain a core competence of the member states. What we'll have in the future is using all the political clout, financial clout, regulatory clout of the European Union to help the member states strengthen all those elements where they need in order to basically create this European Defence Union, which is in complementarity with NATO. Everything that comes with defense planning will remain a NATO task, because NATO does defense planning from its beginning. Everything that deals with defense market, innovation, procurement will be a European Union task, because the European Union has the regulatory and also its own budget that can help the member states invest more, faster in all those capabilities on which they didn't invest in the past 3 decades, because we lived in this ideal world where Europe is a peaceful island.
Just to follow up on your answer on that, why stop at half of the track at the European Defence Union? Why not go to the end of the track and have a European army? And you said before we should still keep some of the job to NATO.
Yeah.
However, if NATO, which is at the moment mostly the United States with its like supreme power in NATO, is it enough just to say, well, the European Union does a bit of like better procurement, better roads? Is it enough, or do we need actually more?
This is a good question. I'm a strong transatlanticist supporter, so I believe in the use and the credibility of NATO as an organization that protected our transatlantic alliance for the past 75 years. I also believe that United States will keep a strong presence in NATO, and they will be interested and will keep their traditional involvement in NATO, but will not have in the future anymore this unbalance where United States invests more than half of the capabilities in NATO by themselves, and the Europeans invest the rest. There will be the need to balance a bit the defense investments inside the alliance, to show that also the Europeans are taking their security in serious. I also believe that Article 5, it's a very strong guarantee to the security of the eastern flank. Russia takes NATO as a serious opponent, and that's a very clear line, a red line there that we have. So I believe that we should support in the future the transatlantic partnership. And I also believe that with Donald Trump as president, things will change, but I hope that things will not dramatically change. That's why I consider that there should be this complementarity between NATO and the European Union. We don't have to reinvent another organization who functioned very well for the past 75 years. We have to make sure that because NATO, according to his treaty, it has a very specific role, and it's an organization created for collective defense. But the world nowadays and the war, how are fought nowadays and will be fought in the future, are bringing new security threats which are out of scope for NATO. That's why we need the European Union, and that's why also we need the European Union to pressure or support the member states to do more of their commitments for NATO.
You mentioned Article 5 on the promise of collective defense in NATO, and Article 5, what it basically says is that an attack on a NATO ally is an attack on all NATO allies. But that article is only effective if the allies respond. And Trump said in a recent conference, reminiscing when he was talking to, quote unquote, the president of a big country, presumably in Europe, who asked him that if they were invaded by Russia, if the United States would still defend the country in question, even if they didn't pay. And Trump said, no, I would not protect you. I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You gotta pay. You gotta pay your bills. So does that put at risk the credibility of the organization? Is Trump bluffing?
We'll have to see if there is a difference between what the presidential candidate Trump said during the presidential campaign for his domestic audience and how President Donald Trump during and throughout his second mandate will act. So it's very soon to predict if there were some campaigning messages or this is his next foreign policy. And in a way, he also sends a very, rational message, the fact that we have a security threat to the security of our continent in Europe, and we have many European states who are still sleepwalking and not investing neither that 2% GDP on defense, a pledge which they took 1 decade ago in 2014. So it shows that they weren't very serious enough in abiding to, their duties as members of the North Atlantic Alliance. And of course, there is a frustration from the American side that they cannot cover everything for the European continent, while they also will have to focus on the Indo-Pacific. So that's why I believe that it's also a good wake-up call for the Europeans to finally start moving faster in the right direction in investing in the security and protection of our continent.
Ionela, are there any concrete recommendations that you would give to European leaders on what the European Union can do to improve its defense capabilities?
Yes, we are thinking that according to our recent publication, 7Ds Defense Extended, there are several steps that are needed in order to build this credible European Defense Union. First, the European Defense Industrial Strategy and the European Defense Industrial Program should be adopted and fully implemented by the member states in order to create a coherent European defense industry. Secondly, the EU should declare a decade of defense in order to harmonize all defense planning and capability priorities at European level, but also to increase the defense budget in the member states. Third, the Union should accept NATO's defense and military capability as priorities as benchmarks and gold standards. In addition, the EU should work with Ukraine to integrate the country into the Western defense mechanism and the European defense industrial landscape, because we have a lot of things that we can learn from Ukrainians. Fourth, the EU should balance the need to develop an industrial production in the short term. So basically the mass production of the military products that are needed now and must be available in sufficient quantities in the next 5 years, with the need to create a single market for defense in the long term. For that, the EU should create this Amazon of defense, as we are calling it, basically a
Amazon
mechanism.
As the online retailer.
Yes, as a mechanism which is controlled by the European Commission, through which basically the Commission will provide an automated marketplace where the militaries of the nation states can more easily buy defense products, including these highly standardized goods and services such as fuel, ammunition, and so on. And lastly, we need to invest more in defense innovation. So for that, we are proposing a European DARPA based on the American model. Basically, DARPA is that American agency created during the Soviet times, Cold War times, which had the purpose to create new and emerging disrupting dual-use defense products. The internet, Siri, GPS were some of the products which were created by DARPA and now also used by civilians. And in the future, we are seeing these technological aspects of defense. The fact that we need also to invest in defense innovation in order to make sure that the European Union is not lagging behind United States and China in having these emerging and disrupting technologies capabilities produced here in Europe. And here I'm referring to drones, to including all this artificial intelligence in the defense products, to all these nano materials which will be used by our militaries.
Ionela, thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to EU Untangled. We really hope you liked this episode on EU defense. If you have any comments, feedback, or you just want to reach out to us, drop us an email to mail@untangled-podcast.eu, or you'll find us on all the major social media websites. Finally, if you like this episode or our show in general, we'd be really happy if you left a positive review or a few stars on your trusted podcast platform, or tell your family, friends, or colleagues about us. That would be really cool. Until next time.